Hi there, Chess Videos people. This is FIDE Master Dennis Monokroussos, and we're going to do a viewer game show for the first time in quite a while. So this first one is submitted by Tulospa, who's a 1950 rated player, and his opponent's rated the same thing. And he had some questions about the game, but also a kind of an interesting theoretical question. Theory in the sense, not of opening theory, but in the broad sense. And what he wants to know, or what he asked is, if he should avoid playing sharp lines, for example, against the Sicilian when he's facing someone who he knows is more theoretically prepared, or at least more of a theory fan than he is. And but he himself is a very sharp player. He likes to get into quite wild positions. And I would say that he's right to go for it. So I think his attitude of playing into these sharp lines, even taking the risk that his opponents may know more than he does, I think it's a good risk. It's appropriate to be true to your style. The only thing I would add is that you should be prepared for the occasional disaster. So once in a while, you'll step into some crazy line where you just have to know your way through it, and if you can't figure it out over the board, then be prepared to pay the price. But I would still say that that's the right way to go. Be true to your style, and try to know enough theory to avoid those disasters. Anyway, let's go ahead and start. He had white, and we go into what, at least at first glance, looks like a Sveshnikov, but instead of b5, black played bishop to e6, and this kind of took white aback. It was a bit of a surprise to him, and was, I think, kind of a new idea. But the funny thing is that this is, in fact, the original way to play this for black. So this whole setup used to be called the Lasker-Pelikan variation, and was played by people like Bent Larsen, and again, as the name suggests, by Emanuel Lasker. I mean, that's how old this thing is. So it's really Sveshnikov who turned b5 into a big and powerful system. All right, so bishop e6, knight c4, rook c8, and here white played knight to e3, which is one of the main moves. Of course, in this kind of structure, white very much wants to just clamp down on d5, take ownership of it forever, and hope that that's enough to really grind black into the ground, into a fine pestle. Well, along those lines, you'll often want to get rid of all of the black minor pieces that can fight for that square. So bishop takes f6 is kind of a typical idea, and as long as white maintains piece control over d5, he's happy. And ideally, white would like to get some kind of great knight on d5 versus a crummy bishop on e7, and have just about everything else exchanged off the board. If he can do that, then certainly he can play without any risk. Whether it's enough to win or not is another question, but certainly it's pleasant. All right, well, as I said, white plays knight to e3, but the more common move is bishop takes f6. Now, black can recapture both ways. On g takes f6, on g takes f6, knight e3, that was part of the point, grabbing the d5 square, and now bishop to h6. All right, so black would like to trade off the dark-squared bishop for one of white's light-squared bishops, for one of white's knights. Light-squared knights, I suppose, but anyway, from here, white has tried both knight jumps to d5, also knight to g4, but the move that seems to score the best is really the peculiar-looking bishop to d3, and it's peculiar on many levels. I mean, first of all, it allows black to trade off the bad bishop for one of the knights. White is damaging his structure. He's plugging up the d file. And yet, despite all of this line seems to be pretty good for white. Certainly, it's scored very well for him. One very high-level example from 1992 went like this. Knight a5, castles, king e7, protecting the f6 pawn, and not committing the king to the king side where bad things could very quickly happen. Queen e1, heading for h4, going after the f6 pawn. h5, which enables rook to h6. Okay, b3, preventing black from putting a piece on c4. Queen c5, hitting the knight. Knight to d5 check. And I would say white's already clearly better at this point, but it gets more than clearly better very fast. Queen c5, knight to d5 check. Now the problem is that white threatens to play b4, winning a piece. So he's got to take, and then he played queen takes d5, which is also probably a mistake, but if he doesn't do it, then his knight is really bad on a5. He's still got problems on the f file. It's not a good position. So he took, but after rook to d1, black was lost. This is a game Kirill Georgiev, I believe it's Kirill rather than Krum Georgiev, against Shirov, played in Biel in 1992. And the game ends very quickly. Rook c to g8, threatening mate. Queen f2, threatening h6. Rook h6, what could be more natural? And now, see if you can figure out how white to move wins. Well, the last move of the game is bishop to g6. And black resigned because f6 is threatened, the queen is threatened, and on queen to e6, the amusing point is that bishop to f5 just traps the queen. So, after just 22 moves, Shirov resigned. And, well, this was a while ago. He was already 2,700 back then, so this is not like Georgiev was beating the 10-year-old Shirov or something. He was beating already a very, very strong player, one of the best in the world. All right, so that was bishop f6, g takes f6. There's also queen takes f6, because knight takes d6, bishop d6, queen d6. Knight d4 is actually very pleasant for black. Say bishop to d3, now queen to g5. And I'm not sure that white can castle either way. Well, queenside is illegal, and kingside looks like bishop to h3 is strong. Also, perhaps knight f3 check, king h1, queen h5 might be very good as well. Threatening queen h2 mate, and if h3, then bishop takes h3. If instead of h3, g takes on f3, then queen f3 check, king g1, bishop h3. Seems to be winning unless there's... Oh, no, wait. Wait, there's queen e5 check then. So maybe you have to be a little bit more careful than that about that. All right, let me take one very quick look at this. Okay, castles. Okay, again, bishop h3 is just fine. But maybe knight f3 check, king here, queen here, takes here, yeah, and on this there's queen e5 check and queen g3. So we can't be quite that careless. So bishop h3 is the way to go. All right, anyway, knight takes d6 definitely gives black very good counterplay. So knight b6 is the main move, and then knight c to d5. And from here, white's options include bishop to c4. I think this is the main move. Bishop to e2 and a4. And in all of these cases, I think white has reasonable chances for an edge. So, it kind of looks to me like a slightly favorable version of the Sveshnikov. I mean, black hasn't played b5. Now, white likes b5 in one sense because it gives him the opportunity to open the queenside with a4. On the other hand, without b5, black is really kind of congested. So I think white has probably some edge here. All right, well, in the game, white played knight to e3, bishop e7, and here he played h4, which his opponent told him was a novelty. It's not. Bishop takes f6 is the main move, but h4 has been played as well. And here I think over the next few moves, black plays a little bit too cooperatively, and then white really gets his bind. So here and elsewhere, I think queen to b6 is not a bad move. Hitting b2. Okay, he played knight to d4, bishop d3. Again, I think queen b6 or queen to a5 are good moves. But the best move is the move I accidentally showed you there, I think it's the best move. Knight to g8, enabling black to trade off his bad bishop and keep a knight. So this way he keeps good control over the d5 square, or sufficient control at any rate. And the point of h4 was to stop bishop g5, bishop takes e3 ideas. So in other words, to try to keep his favorable ratio of pieces that can fight for the d5 square. But if it's allowing black to keep this knight and trade off the bishop, then it comes to about the same sort of thing. All right, in the game, black played h6, and white continued with the main strategic plan. Takes, okay, g3 protecting the pawn. And the point of h4, as I said, was to stop bishop to g5, so the knight on e3 won't be exchanged off. All right, in an earlier game, black played queen to d7, presumably with the standard idea of swinging the bishop from d8 or f6 to d8 and then to b6 or a5, and it's a sensible idea. In the game, black played queen to b6, and it's okay here too, but I still think that white is fine. So rook to b1, maybe queen a5 is the best idea, perhaps aiming for an exchange sacrifice. It may not be so bad, although it's uncomfortable, or it's, let's say, unfortunate that the pawn on b7 is loose. Anyway, black played queen to c6, and now white just castles and plays knight c to d5. So he's achieved at least one of the big strategic goals in this opening. Okay, knight to b5. Here I think an interesting try for white is bishop to e2. And the idea is that after knight to c7, there's bishop to g4, and so black is unable to capture on d5, keep capturing on d5 until white has a pawn there, because the rook on c8 will hang. And on rook to b8, maybe something like bishop to f5 is pleasant. So white has a very small edge here, but it probably is a little bit of an edge. All right, in the game, white played queen h5, then knight c7, rook b to d1, knight e8, and now the very interesting but somewhat double-edged g4. Okay, black went here, takes, and I think at this point white could have improved. So king h2, I think, is a bit inaccurate. One very useful rule of thumb in chess is to always play the most flexible choice when you have a choice. Now, white is going to play g5. In fact, he plays it, I think, the very next move. But you're not, it depends on what black does. If black takes on g5, then the h-file is open, so you want the rook on the h-file. And in that case, you'd want to play king to g2. On the other hand, if black retreated the bishop, then you could play g takes h6, the g-file opens, and then king h2 or king h1 followed by rook to g1 makes more sense. So that's why I think the immediate g5 is good. And it's important to note this tactic, that if g6, okay, of course you don't play queen h6 because bishop g7 wins the queen, but you do play queen to f3. And so you're counterattacking the bishop on f6, so black doesn't win the pawn on g5. Alright, so in the game was king h2, and here I think black should have played queen to b6, hitting the b2 pawn, and in general going for counterplay. So here it seems to me that black is okay. Not fantastic. I would be worried still, but I think he can perhaps hold on. And if g takes h6, bishop takes h4 to get rid of the h4, h5 battering ram. So perhaps black is all right at this point. And if white doesn't find a way to break through over on the king side, I mean, the queen side is collapsing. Queen b2, rook c3, and so on. Okay, well, black played queen to e8, which really doesn't help much. Now g5, g6, queen f3, bishop g7, and now a very nice move. I think it's completely sound and probably best. Knight f5. Here, black should maybe just play it safe and play queen to d8, protecting the d6 pawn and trying to keep lines closed. Also note that if g takes h6, black could play bishop takes h6 because knight h6, queen h4 check, and queen takes h6 regains the piece. Black instead played the very brave, but perhaps almost foolhardy, g takes f5. I think it is the best move, but it's like I said, it's very risky. All right, white took, and now black had to find the best move, and that was e4. So after e4, okay, if queen takes e4, bishop c4 takes care of problems. So, yeah, if the queen runs away, then bishop takes d3. Or bishop to e5 check sometimes first, and then bishop d3. So the point of e4, by the way, is that white wants to play f6 and bury that bishop alive. So by playing e4, the bishop comes out first, and then this bishop can move off. And although the position looks very, very scary for black, I don't see any forced win for white. So here's a sample variation. Okay, f4, now d5. So again, black keeps having all these little counter tricks here to save his material. Okay, rook d5 is kind of nice, but rather than taking that, just bishop to b8, queen b6, rook f to d8, and it's not easy for black to get to this position. Even from here, he's got to be very careful, but it seems that he's better. So it's very difficult, practically speaking, but objectively, black was okay. Well, in the game, he played d5, and it's also a reasonable idea, but maybe not as strong. White could play g takes h6 here, and if e4, the queen goes to the g file and just wins right away. So bishop f6, fe, check, bishop g6, and I think black is actually all right here. I mean, white's up a pawn, but the number of the pawns isn't that important here. With the two doubled h pawns, the isolated f pawn, and black's nice little mass in the center. I mean, it's really going to come down to who can grab and maintain the initiative here. All right, white decided instead to play f6, and now black plays e4. So it's still okay. Here, maybe black should play king h7, and then meet f takes g7 with rook to g8, trying to use the g file for his own purposes instead. All right, h5 makes sense too, though. But here I think white is a little bit better. Well, black needed to find something a bit more feisty than rook to h8, because now, after f4, the board is opening up in the center, and black is in a lot of trouble. So he played queen d7. Here I think the best is queen to f2, just immediately grabbing the dark squares, and also threatening f5, too. And if black plays bishop to f5, white can play queen to d4 check, and then take on d5, garnering an extra pawn. So c4 I think is not quite as good, but it's still a very logical move. And in fact, black didn't react very well. So he played rook c5, b4, and now the game is just over. Rook c6. Okay, queen f2 is again best, but f5 is okay. Black's last chance was to take here, with the idea being that on this, then the queen goes to c7 check. Although queen to g3 still maintains a significant white advantage. Or immediately queen to g3, and now rook takes d5. Well, back to the game. Black played queen to d6 check, trying to free up a retreat square for the bishop, but it just doesn't work. White's just going forward. Plays rook takes d5 and queen takes e4, and just runs black off the board. So he tried queen takes b4, but this doesn't stand a chance either. And here black is dead lost. Queen f6 check is a huge threat. He tried queen to c3, which makes sense. Protecting the rook and hoping for some queen h3 perpetual action, but queen f7 is mate. So that was the end of that game. A pretty good game, I think. I think white played well. Wasn't perfect, but who plays perfectly anyway? Doesn't happen too often. All right, well, an interesting game, and let's move on to the next one here. So this was played between Ulrich Kinkelin and Alparslan Yalcin. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. I think it's a Turkish name. And black is the one who submitted this. They're both in the 1900s. Oh, I guess black is now over 2000. Anyway, this was played in I think a club competition in a league event, and well, let's have a look. All right, so it was a modern Benoni. And, okay, here, yeah, this is an old line that was played by Penrose. I believe the famous Penrose tall game from the Olympiad in 1960 in Leipzig went like this. So bishop to g7, and here I think the main line nowadays involves white first playing knight to e2. So patient play first, and then it gets to normal channels. In the game, white played f4, and this seems to be premature, because after castles, knight f3, there's this b5 idea. And it's kind of like the line where white has played h3 instead of f4, but this seems to me to be a better version for black than there. Bishop takes b5, knight e4, knight e4, queen a5 check, and then here, in this version of it, white generally plays king f2. Black takes, knight takes d6. Now, in the h3 version of this, white gets out of the check by playing knight from f3 to d2, and then here, if I remember right, black is generally playing queen to a6, and white plays knight from d2 to c4 in response. And lots of theory can be found on that. Here too, it seems like both move. Well, queen a6 is possible again, and this is how white responds. Queen b6 seems to be the main move, and only now playing queen to a6. So kind of a funny finesse. Apparently, if white plays knight takes c8 here, it's felt that the queen makes good sense on b6, threatening the check, threatening b2. All right, well, anyway, that's the main move. But knight to c3 is very rare and doesn't seem to do especially well. So bishop c3 is forced, of course, but it's not bad. Okay, white played king f2, preparing to castle by hand. Here, black has played knight to d7 and queen to c4, but bishop b7 is also sensible. All right, from here, white played f5. So a very direct approach. He wants to get the bishop to h6 and hope to generate some kingside attacking chances. But at this point, he really shouldn't be able to succeed. I think black's development is sufficiently good, and white doesn't really have enough pieces that can easily access the relevant dark squares on the king side. Well, here black played queen to c4, which is a good concept, but it's not the best implementation of the concept. So he's simply trying to round up this pawn on d5, and he's hitting the pawn on c3 too, for that matter. But the best move seems to be knight to d7. Now, if bishop h6, rook f to b8, black is doing quite well. If queen to b3, then takes, bishop d5, rook d1, and now knight f6. And this is really the key aspect of this. So c4, bishop b7, white can't take on d6 because of knight e4 check. And in this position, black is, not a lot better, but a little better. He's got a little pull here. Well, in the game, after queen c4, here queen to b3 would have been good enough to at least equalize. It seems funny because just grabbing a pawn, it's not obvious what white's big idea is, but after rook to d1 and then rook takes d6, all of a sudden black's forces really are not doing very well. I mean, the knight on b8 is trapped. It's dominated, I should say. And so the rook on a8 is stuck in place. And white's pieces are all very active here. And the extra pawn doesn't play any real factor at all at the moment. So that's what white should have done. Instead he played bishop to h6. And now after rook to e8, black is a little bit better. Queen to b3 is probably again the best move, not fearing checks on d2. But he played rook to e1, which is understandable. However, after knight to d7, now there's no attack for white. d5 is weak and c3 is weak. And it's just not clear what white really has. So he tried queen to d2. Black played bishop takes d5, correctly not fearing queen to g5. I mean, there's just nothing to do over there. f6 is covered, and black is fine. So rook a to d1. But here, black should have traded the rooks. Okay, if knight takes e1, then knight f6 is fine, threatening knight to g4 check, and especially knight to e4 check. While if rook takes e1, well, now there's no double attack on the bishop, so black can simply play queen takes a2. But even here, knight f6 is better. So white is in big trouble at this point. So queen a2, I think, is a bit of a mistake. Takes, rook d6, takes, and here knight takes e1, I think, would have been a bit better. So black is slightly better at this point, but not a lot. I would expect a draw. I mean, not just because of the opposite colored bishops, but because that bishop on h6 really ties black down. The only thing white has to worry about is the passed a pawn, and that is something. But let's say white ends up playing knight c2 a3. Well, it's not very easy to break through after that. So white, I think, should hold. In the game, white played king takes e1, which isn't quite as good. Black should probably have played knight to b6, but played rook e8 check. And I think this is, again, kind of along the wrong path. I mean, it would be better to try to make something with the a pawn. So king f2, knight b6, knight e5. Of course, the knight is immune because of the back rank mate. And this was very clever. So now the threat's to play rook to g3 check with an immediate draw, at least. So f4, and now knight to g4. And here the position is equal. So black's two pawns are counterbalanced by white's very active pieces, and the fact that the black pawn structure is kind of messed up. Well, black did eventually win the game, but we'll leave off here. So the more interesting moments from our point of view were in the opening and middle game, and that's really what he was asking about primarily. So let's move on to the next game, and this is between I'm not sure how to say either of these names, Hessehe or Jessige, I'm not sure, against, I'm guessing, Salis, so a Norwegian player who's the one who submitted this. And since I had presented the Norwegian variation, and he's Norwegian, so I presented the Norwegian variation of the Ruy Lopez, or at least I've seen it called the Norwegian. He knew it as the Scandinavian variation. He decided to test it out in a few games. Of course, I don't think I really recommended it, but patriotism got the better of him, and he played it, and it worked out well. So let's have a quick look. So he was curious about something late in the game. Let me see, make sure I even made a comment about it. Yeah, okay. So right at the end of the game, it really didn't matter too much. He was winning easily. So I'll confine my remarks primarily to the opening. So this is the Norwegian variation, or Scandinavian variation, with the knight coming to a5. Here there are all kinds of moves. Castling is the main move. I mentioned bishop takes f7 check is kind of a fun line that I've used to beat even GMs in blitz. I've never faced this in a tournament game yet, but probably castling is the safest move. d4 is another important move too. Well, his opponent tried another move, which is in fact quite decent. Knight takes e5. Okay, so takes, and now queen e7 is the normal move, but queen g5 is not without point either. Knight f3, queen g2, rook g1, queen h3, and probably this is about equal. I mean, both sides have things wrong with their position. Black has the better pawn structure in the bishop pair, But, where's his development? White's going to have better control over the center. And it's just kind of a messy position. But it should be okay for both sides. So queen e7 is much more responsible. d4, d6, and here white should retreat the knight either to g4 or to f3. So if knight to g4, the idea is to put the knight on e3. And here, there's both the normal continuation, like just castling kingside, and something like this, which is about equal. Both sides have their trumps. Once again, white's got a little more influence in the center, but black has the bishop pair, and in the long run, that could be very important. Instead of casting, white might try the more ambitious d5, little space grab here. And again, though, I think the position is roughly equal after either bishop to b7 or bishop to d7. So he does have to do something, though, about the threat of knight takes b5. Anyway, that's knight to g4. So it's also quite possible to play simply knight f3. And this position, too, I think is about equal, though maybe white has a small pull. For instance, here, seems to me that white, again, is a little bit more comfortable, but not a lot. Knight c3 will be met by queen to d3. And in fact, black can play queen to d3 straight away. And once again, about a position like this, I think that it's roughly equal, but maybe white has still a little edge he can play with. Well, in the game, white chose a different knight move, but it wasn't very good. He played knight to c6. Black traded queens and played bishop to b7. And as the pawn on g7 is protected, white has to play the uncomfortable has to play the uncomfortable d5. As knight retreats allow simply bishop takes g2. Actually, even if there wasn't a bishop on f8, it would still be good for black because bishop g2, rook g1, bishop b4, rook g7, and then not only bishop takes c2, but simply bishop to g6, followed by king f8, let's say, would win the exchange. Well, all of this means that white has to play d5. And now, knight to e7, takes and takes, and black is a little bit better here. At this point, I would prefer king to d7. I think it is an endgame. I think it's enough of an endgame, as opposed to a late middle game, that the king is safe. Very importantly, white doesn't have a light squared bishop, so there's not going to be any check on a square like f5 to worry about. There are no safe knight checks to the king on d7, because c5, b6, e5, and f6 are all covered, let alone f8 or b8. It's on a closed file, and there isn't any kind of white has no access to the 7th rank either. So putting all of this together, the king is very safe on d7. So I'd rather have it centralized. It helps maybe to cover some potentially weak squares on the queen side. So this looks like the way to go. All right, so castles, it's safe, but it's unnecessarily safe. Okay, rook e1, bishop f6. And here I think king to d3 would have been better, getting the king off of the e-file, away from checks there. Instead, after knight to c3, rook f to e8 is a little bit of a nuisance. White went back. And now c6. This was a good move, opening the board for the bishops. Why not? Especially with white really being pretty underdeveloped at this point. Maybe white should have swapped and played knight to f4, potentially playing knight to d5, or maybe knight to d3 in the near future. Instead, knight f4 immediately happened. And here I like rook e8 check and then c5. So locking it up, and then you reroute the bishop back into play in this way. The thing is, wherever the king goes in response to this check, he's got some problems. If he goes to d1, then it takes away the rook on a1's route into the center. If he goes to d2, of course, he's clogging up the bishop on c1. So all in all, I think it's a slightly inferior position for white. Now g5, I think, is a little bit of an inaccuracy. White should have played knight to h5. And the knight's more active here. If the bishop retreats, away from e7 or d8, then the pawn on g5 hangs. Anyway, this would have been my way to go. I think white is just about equal there. All right, instead after knight to d3, it's fine as far as material goes, because white could take on a6. But still, with the open board, the bishop pair, is a real asset. So black's a bit better there. Well, in the game, though, white played f3. And I would say this is a mistake not only tactically, which it is because it just leaves white 2 pawns down, but even positionally I think it's a bit inaccurate because the threat of bishop takes g2 is not really a big one. The reason being that white's split pawns on the king side are perfectly sufficient to prevent black from easily making a passer with his 3-2 majority. So unless white had a majority over on the king side, it wouldn't really be that important for him to keep the pawn structure nice and tidy as it is. So f3 just gives away a pawn, and here the rest of the way black I think plays pretty nicely. Maybe not, there are little moves here and there where maybe there's something very slightly better that black can do, but essentially it's just a very nice, clean, technical job. So this is all very good. And here comes the pawn. Alright, here he mentioned, I'm not sure, well he said 35, let me check what I put. Oh yeah, so he asked about 33 d5. Yeah, I mean it's unnecessary as he said. I mean you can just play a4, but again it doesn't really matter, so this is all fine. You can also play a3 here too. Right, so there are other options here. So in addition to just running the pawn right away. But if you do that, then king c4, so I like d5. I think this is fine. And yeah, just this. And there's no way, of course, for the white king to cover all 3 pawns. So here, white gave up. All right, well, a very nice game. Very well played game by Salas there. All right, let's take a look here. And this is a game between Kazmar and Flatman, also known as Chris Falter. So this is a long game, and he's already commented on it quite a lot on another site on the Chess Videos server. So you can, in fact, look this game up in the thread. Show Dennis your games, or have me look at your games, and you'll find it. You'll find the link there. And again, he's put in a lot of work there, which is great. But I'm going to use that as an excuse not to put in so much work. But I will make a few comments about the opening, because I think I have something to say about that can hopefully be helpful. So, knight f3, knight f6, g3, d5, c4. And the first thing I want to say is this, that having spent some time recently looking at ready and King's Indian attack hybrids, I think that the combination of g3 and c4 doesn't work out so well against d5 setups unless you do one of two things. Unless you go into a Caro-Kann, play d4 here, or bishop d4, although it's not necessarily going to be a pure Caro-Kann. I mean, it could turn into a Grunfeld, but you can try that. So the other option is to play a b3 line. I think if white doesn't do either of those, then this setup is extremely ineffective. I would also say that the b3 approach is very ineffective for white also in case black plays c6 and white plays c takes d5. So c d5, I think, against a Slav, when you fianchetto the king bishop, is really just not impressive at all. The one exception, unless you play d4. So like here, although I think it's already too late. So like on d4 here, black gets the knight to e4 before white gets the knight e5 setup. And these positions, I think, are perfectly good for black too. Okay, the other thing I wanted to say, right, so given that, my preference would be, it's knight f3 against knight f6. You don't have the choice to play c4 and have it ready. You have to wait till the d pawn goes to d5. So, I would say either go for a Caro-Kann or play a b3 system here. Those would be, I think, the more promising options. All right, after CD, this, I think, just offers white nothing. And after castles, e5, black has no problems here. Now, I think the only way for white to even make this position interesting is to play d4. Certainly it doesn't give him an advantage, but it's the only way to keep life in the position, to give black decisions to make where he might go wrong. I think best now is e4, knight e5, bishop d6, bishop f4, castles, and knight to c3. And because black's d5 pawn is not completely secure, white still has some chances to outplay his opponent. It's equal chances here. Both sides have reasonable play. All right, in the game, white played instead d3. And now, black played bishop to e7, which is certainly not a bad move. My preference would be for h6. And my thinking is this. White's only possible way of obtaining any kind of positive play is, or at least for the foreseeable future, is to pressure the pawn on d5. And that would involve playing bishop to g5. Kind of like that Lasker Pelican game that we looked at earlier. So same kind of idea. We get rid of the dark squared bishop, which can't exert any pressure in a direct way on the d5 pawn. But we get rid of it by exchanging for one of the pieces that can fight for the d5 square. So h6 cuts that out. A second value to this move is that at some point, if black decides to play bishop to f5, there's no worry about knight to h4. It can simply drop back to h7. All right, so bishop to e7, b3, castles, bishop to b2. And here my last comment is that instead of bishop to d6, I would kind of prefer d4 here. I think this is quite good, especially since the c3 square could turn out to be a bit of a headache for white down the road, while the c4 square, while a reasonable outpost for white knight, I think is more easily challenged. Well, is easily challenged, let's say. And the c3 square is perhaps an almost eternal problem. All right, so after d4, I believe black is slightly better. And again, it was a long and interesting game, but I'll refer you to Chris Falter's own notes and compilation of other people's notes for more information about it. Okay, so let us move on to the next game, and this time the submitter was white. This is submitted by Lolalf, or maybe it's Laugh Out Loud Alf, or maybe it's Lola LF. I'm not sure how to read that. And the opponent I can read. That's Ralph M. Anyway, Lolalf, or Lola LF, or whatever it is, wants to know if the combination that he or she played was correct. So let's have a look. So the submitter was white, and this is all theory. And white is building up a very dangerous-looking attacking setup. And in fact, from here, black's move, castling kingside, was a novelty. And considering that, again, it's castling right into it, it's not surprising that this is a new move. So white played e5, and then here, he or she set up the attacking idea with rook to f3. Now, I would say after rook f3, knight c3, the idea is completely correct. So the question is really whether rook to f3 is the best move. And it seems to me that it may not be. It may be that just the very simple, kind of banal, but I think effective, knight takes d5 followed by c4, and let's say rook a to e1, gives white a nice safe advantage. So all the advantages, or almost all of the advantages of white's position remain in place, and without sacrificing anything. So this is perfectly fine. The problem is with rook f3 that black plays knight takes c3 and threatens the queen, of course, but also threatens the rook with the bishop on b7. White is essentially committed to bishop takes h7. And this is correct, and it's fine. And white is certainly not worse here. It's just whether white can gain an advantage. And as far as I can tell, white should not gain an advantage here. It should just be a draw. So rook h3, king g8, queen h5. And here we have a first interesting moment. Black can also play knight to e2 check here, but I don't think that has any independent significance, probably. I think that's equal as well, but I'm not going to look at that line. So instead I'm going to look at f6, which is the move played in the game, and f5. And the first thing to say is that f5 is probably a mistake. It looks like white obtains a winning advantage here with knight takes e6. Okay, bishop c5 check is just about forced. And now, not king h1, but king f1. And the key point here is this, that after queen to e7, knight to g5 is simply winning. This is just game over. Black has to give up the queen, and it won't be enough. Or he'll still be in too much trouble even after that, would be the better way of putting it. Well, you might say, what's the difference between that and king to h1? Well, the difference is this, that if knight to g5 here, black takes. Okay, big deal, white takes. And now knight to e4. And the problem is knight to f2 check is coming, and then knight takes h3 check is coming, and black is going to have way too much material for the queen. So that's why King f1 is correct here, and because King f1 is so strong, that's why f5 is a mistake. So f6, as played in the game, is correct. Check here, check. And now, of course, they could have just repeated with king to g8, or at least king g8, queen e7. h7 would be a repetition. But white can play on too. I don't know if that was the intent, but it's certainly possible. Black, I think, can survive with maybe a very small advantage, but this requires finding an awful lot of only moves to do so. Okay, queen e8, queen h7 check, king f7, and now knight takes g7. And it's important to know what the threat is, and it's not primarily to the queen. If queen d8, e6 mate would be a big oops. So we've got to play bishop to c5 check, and then move the queen out of the way. So that stops both the mate and saves the queen. Well, here black is up 2 pieces for just 2 pawns. And white doesn't seem to have any really effective discovered check, and all of these black diagonal pieces are pointing over at the white king side. But despite this, the game, or the battle, is far from over. Knight h5 check, king e6, bishop takes c3, and here the threat now is rook to e1. It's black who has to be very careful, and the only move here seems to be bishop to e4. Well, now knight to g7 check, king d5, queen h4, and the black queen is still under attack. The king is on d5, for goodness sake, and well, it's pretty frightening, and it is, however, the case that black can survive. He's got to find some really good moves. Okay, 2 options here. Everything else loses. There's bishop to d4, and there's bishop takes g2 check. If bishop to d4, a nice little box in the center there, white should be careful. If he plays rook to d1, he's losing. Bishop takes g2 check, king g2, queen e2 check. Now, queen f2 obviously just loses the queen. King h1 allows queen takes d1 with check, and then the attack just continues from there. So king to g3 is the only sensible try from the standpoint of trying to make it competitive, but it just gets mated. Queen f2, knight e5, rook h8. Thanks for playing. So, rook to d1 is unacceptable. Bishop takes d4 is what white has to try. Queen takes d4, and now what does white do? I'm not sure if it's the only move that's any good here, but it seems to be the best move, and that's the spectacular rook to d3. Well, the only move that makes any sense now is bishop takes d3, and now c4 check. Okay, if the king goes to e1, then rook to e1 check looks quite strong. One funny line, let me see if I've got this right. King e5, rook e1 check, bishop e4, and now, if I'm not hallucinating, queen to g3 is mate. Yep, it is. So that's kind of a pretty variation there, unless you're black. Whoops. King to c5, of course, is simple. Knight e6 check. So bishop takes c4 is forced. bc, king c4, rook c1, king d5. How do we get at this guy? Well, we don't. What we do is we win the queen. So queen h5 check, knight e5. If king to d6, then knight f5. So knight e5, and now rook to d1. At last, the black king manages to find its way to safety, and with 2 rooks for the queen, it's an equal position. Black's king is too exposed for him to have serious winning chances, but shouldn't really have serious losing chances either. Alright, well, that was a look at bishop to d4. Perhaps the best move is bishop takes g2 check, king g2, queen e2, king h1, and now rook h8. The queen on d1 takes, the queen on e2 takes away d1 from the rook on a1. Rook d3 would be met by queen takes d3, as white's queen has no place to give check to save herself. So it looks like the best move is knight to h5. And now, king to c6, so the little guy runs away, or the big guy runs away. In fact, white has to be a bit careful here not to get into serious trouble. His own king is really quite exposed. Queen to e1, rook e8, takes, and now another key move for white, without which black would be seriously better, and that's knight to g3. Rook takes h3, knight e2, bishop d6, and this regains the pawn, but still material is reduced enough that white really should draw. So black's a little bit better, can certainly play on, but I think white should hold this. All right, well that was quite a bit of an examination of king to g8. Instead of this, however, black played g6. So black was the one who felt ambitious here. Queen h7 check, king e8, queen g6. Actually, knight takes e6 first might be better. I'm not positive, but it might be better. Black must again play bishop to c5 check. And again, white has to be careful. If he goes to f1, well, this is a blunder because f takes e5 is check. And after knight f8, queen f6, and white is in terrible danger here. Okay, yeah, white's just losing. If he tries king h1 instead, well, a trick we saw before comes into play once more. Knight to e4. So if knight takes, then knight f2 check, knight takes h3 check, and then we take the knight on d8, and black has once more way too much material for the queen. So the right move is knight takes c5. All right, knight takes c5, bishop c3, and white has 2 pawns for the piece. It's really not such a bad deal materially, and with black's king stuck in the center, I would certainly feel much happier playing the white side of this position than black. Okie doke. Instead of knight takes e6, though, queen g6 was the move in the game, and only now knight takes e6. Well, bishop c5 check was the right move back here. So after knight e6, bishop c5 was the best try. But in this version, it turns out to be a mistake. Black needed to play knight takes e5. Rook h8 check, rook takes d8, and now still one more spectacular blow in a game and analysis full of spectacular blows. King e6. The rook is hanging on d8, the queen is threatened on g6, and at the moment, black has already got 3 pieces for a queen, well, queen and 2 pawns. The rook's going to be thrown in too, but of course the knight on c3 jumps into the mix as well. So after something like this, the material balance is a queen and 2 pawns for a rook, bishop, and a knight. And I would say not only the material, but the position, though highly imbalanced, is approximately equal. Alright, that's what should have happened. Instead, black played bishop to c5 check, knight takes c5, and here black has only one move to stay alive, and it's another ridiculously, well, to use the word again, just another spectacular kind of move, or another just, amazing shot. In the game, black played knight to e2 check, but what he needed to do was play knight f8. So despite the fact that all of these pieces are hanging, just makes this calm retreat rather than capturing anything. And after queen h5, queen to d4 check, king h1. Here I think not b takes e5. I think on b c5, white is going to enjoy an advantage ultimately in this position. I think white's clearly better here. So it's 3 pawns for the piece. There is pressure against white. I mean, he's got to be aware of tricks with taking on g2 and then going to e1, but it looks like white should be able to hold it together, and that white's long-term attacking prospects are more impressive than black's. Instead of b takes c5, let's try queen takes c5. From here, bishop c3 again, now f5, aiming to keep the center as closed as possible, but now e6. So white will give back one of the pawns, and in return, enjoy very good attacking prospects. Still, black is alive, and it's important, I think, for him that he can often meet a rook to the e-file move with bishop to e4. Or she. Again, I don't know if it's Lola, LF, or what exactly the handle represents. Anyway, back to the game. Knight f8, as we saw, was the only try, although white still has pressure there. After knight to e2 check, it's not merely pressure, white is simply winning. King to h1. Here, if knight to f4, which is the obvious move, knight to b7, or knight takes b7, gives white a decisive advantage. Knight takes queen, rook takes, and then the little scorpion's sting, e6, and white gains a piece back, and will end up at least a couple of pawns ahead. Well, that still would have been better than knight takes e5. After this, it's just a massacre. We can kind of quickly look through this. So right now, white has 4 pawns for 2 pieces, but wins the queen, and then wins this. And now white has a queen and 4 pawns for a rook and a knight, which is an overwhelming material advantage. 5-point material advantage, with more on the way because of the pin on the d file. After king c6, white should have just played c4, but h3 didn't really ruin anything. After rook h8, white took advantage of a new opportunity and played rook takes d5. And black resigned, as after king takes d5, queen c4 check picks up the rook, and this was too much material for black to bear. Alright, so a very impressive game. And now we move on to another one. So this is from Flynn Eastwood, also known as Josh Winterberg, and he wants to know where black threw away the draw. And this is a game he annotates in some depth. Again, you can find the game with the annotations in the thread where people who post games for me to look at is located. So I'm just going to zip ahead to around this point. So he had the white side of a Caro-Kann. He looked at a game that I demonstrated for you guys last year from, I think, around April, maybe April or May of last year. And at this point, white has is going for this nice clamp. So we reach this end game here where black has to be a bit careful. It may seem quite natural to simply swap off everything and go into a king and pawn ending, but that king and pawn ending is probably lost, as we'll see here. Well, I think the best move for black at this point is to avoid that pawn ending and play like this, to trade off one pair of rooks and then play f5. Here, I believe black's counterplay is sufficient really to draw the game without any serious difficulty. If rook to d6, then just fg, rook f4, rook e6, rook g4, no problems at all. So this gives black sufficient counterplay to be in good shape. Okay, in the game black played king to c7, white played king c2, and well, let's just look at the game, and then we'll make some comments going backward. So king to b6, b4, c5, and then we enter this pawn ending. Well, I believe that white is winning here, as I said. Though I wouldn't quite say it's 100%, but I'm pretty close to 100% sure that it's a win. Alright, in the game black played cb, ab, and then a5. Thinking that, this activates the king a bit, maybe he gets some chances for an outside passer, but it doesn't work out at all. Let me go back to here though. Briefly, if king c6, trying to just hold the position, then white is going to play king to c2, bring the king to a4, and then go for the kingside breakthrough, or at least threaten the kingside breakthrough, forcing black to make a decision with his king. And ultimately, that's what's going to happen in variation after variation. The black king is going to be overloaded. Either it helps to defend on the queen side and allows the breakthrough on the king side, or vice versa. It goes to the king side, white's king breaks through on the queen side and wins the game. So, let's see how it went. CB, AB, A5, takes. Alright, now, if black just takes, makes the obvious move, then F4. What does black do? If he plays king to B4, then here it comes. F5. Okay, and the basic idea is this. EF5, G takes F5, king C5. If he plays king C4, of course, he'd play E6. So king C5, but now black is stuck. He can't do anything. Alright, if he plays B5, then E6, takes here, takes, and now white wins with the outside passer. And you can win with this in two different ways. He could use it as a diversion and win the kingside pawns, or he could just stalemate the black king, force G5, and then play HG5. Black plays H5, white plays G7, black plays H4, and white plays G8, queen or rook, checkmate. So B5 won't help. Well, if he tries to just hold down the fort, again, he gets overloaded. So white is just going to keep bringing the king up, play E6 when he's good and ready, and the black king will have to give ground. Okay, back to here. We just looked at king to B4. Well, how about if he just kind of sits around and plays something like king to A6? Well, F5, takes, king B6, king D2, and again, even here C5. It's not necessary, but this works too. We play like this. Alright, let's say this, and now if that, then here. So C4 is forced, and again, it might seem like black is alright here. I mean, he's liquidated the queen side, his, white doesn't even have a passed pawn here, his king gets back, but this is lost too. Okay, king to D4, king D7, king D5, king E7, E6. So we just go forward. Very, very simple. Alright, we'll see in another variation what happens in case of f6, but essentially it'll work the same way. White will stalemate the black king, black plays g5, white takes en passant, and mates. So fe, king e8, king d6, and as alluded to several times now, we use this quasi-stalemate trick. Black has to play g5, white takes, and then we mate. Alright, so that's the basic problem facing black. Okay, in the game, he played king to c5 instead. White plays king e2, king takes c4, and here white blundered. White made a losing move. He played king to e3. It doesn't seem that should be losing, but the tempi actually matter here. And what he needed to do was play f4. So after f4, king c5, king d3, king d5, king e3, king c5, king e4, king c6, king d4, b5, takes, and again, f5. So this time we'll see what happens if black plays f6. Well, e6. Okay, so you can see we can't do anything that way. So the right way is to go around. We come here, and in we go. And again, quasi-stalemate. Black is forced to push the g-pawn, and then we take and give mate however we like. Okay, we can be a little silly and do it in 2 moves instead of 1, but under promote. Of course, you can make a bishop too and play bishop f7 the next move. Alright, so that's what white had to play. He had to play f4 right away. And the point of all of this, by the way, I should at least show you guys this at one point, is that on king to b5, we play f5. Alright? And if you're wondering, well, what's the big deal? Why can't I just take this guy on a5? The answer is that white has 2 winning moves from here. You can play f6, and then on gf6, ef6, black does whatever, b5, and we play g5. And white wins. Okay, he has to bring his king over in case black just pushes the b pawn. But actually he doesn't. I take it back. He doesn't even have to do that. Because here, okay, gh6, here, both sides queen. I could have made a rook too for that matter. And then queen to a8 check, and queen to b7. Alright, but that's the basic idea. So there's f6, and there's also g5. So there's also this spectacular approach. And next comes f6 or g6, depending on which pawn gets taken, if any. So for instance, here, g6 takes e6. And notice the black king is 1 square too far away. And that's why white had to play f4 immediately instead of king to e3. So in the game, after king to e3, king b5, f4, king a5, g5 or f5 comes to the same thing. Black had time. King to b6, f5, takes, g6, takes, e6, king c6, and black wins. Fortunately for white, black did not do that. So instead of playing king to b6, he played b5, simply unfamiliar with this breakthrough motif, and here he resigned. Alright, well now that we've seen what happened in the game, let's see if black can create some other kind of setup. So we started from here, so takes, and then, okay, I mentioned that this is probably the best way for black to proceed. Okay, after king c7, king c2, I tried various other approaches. Like I tried a5, hoping that there might be some way to fix the queen side so the white king can't get in. For instance, well, okay, actually this isn't an example, but this is another counterplay example. Here black is fine. But I think this, again, doesn't succeed. Black should avoid the trade of rooks here, too, with rook f8 or whatever. So here, for instance, if you play a4, then if black could play c5, well, even that's not going to hold. But anyway, white plays c5 first himself, and it's hopeless. The black king can't go around because f4, f5 is going to happen. And in this position, again, the black king gets overloaded and is going to lose the c-pawn. Okay, if he tries instead of a4 here to play b5, again hoping to sew things up, well, white doesn't cooperate. King c2, king c3, and here b4, and this is winning because the white king just is going to break through, so there's no way to keep him out. Alright, so that's another winning variation. Okay, in the game it was king b6, b4, and we already saw c5 and how that goes. So how about king c7? Well, takes, rook d1. Again, rook d1 loses. Black should move the rook somewhere, anywhere, just to get out of the way. But if rook to d1, okay, let's try some other setups from here. Okay, if b6, king c2, okay, again, a5 fails, it takes, and then c5. And the white king will attack the a-pawn, and black can't both defend that and stop the kingside breakthrough. If a6, okay, whatever you do, don't play a4, because then after c5 it might be a draw. Although maybe after a5, no, I think it is a draw. But okay, there's no reason to even go for that. So f4, king d7, bring the king to a4, and now play c5, and this wins. So just f5, black has to trade and then bring the king back, and then white plays king a5 and wins easily. Okay, so that's b6, not working. How about b5? Well, this doesn't work either. King c2, king c3. So the king's going to keep going up. It'll go to d4 and then to c5. And if black tries c5, then takes, f4, takes, here. And the black king again has to give ground. If he plays something like this, trying to just liquidate everything, well, he's going to be too late. So here, and white is faster on the queen side than black on the king side. So that's a win as well. And then finally, from this position, if black tries c5, then I would say just play king c2. So again, the plan is to bring the king to a4, play f4, and then the black king will again be overloaded. The white will be able to break through one way or another. All right, so a very interesting endgame, a very instructive ending. If you play the Caro-Kann, you've absolutely got to know that and make sure that you don't get into a losing version of it. All right, I think this is the last one. Let me see really fast. Nope, I've got two more. Oof, long lesson here, long video. Okay, this is a game between Zitvono, again I'm guessing about the pronunciation, against Fibraio. Okay, so Zitvono is a regular chess videos person, and was kind of surprised by knight to c6 and played bishop to e3. This isn't really the main move. Knight c3 would be the main move, and you can probably also play c4 here too. I think this is okay as well, inviting transposition to an accelerated dragon. But bishop to e3 I think is not really ideal. One reason is that after knight f6, which was not played in the game, knight c3, knight to g4 is considered very good. I mean, this is essentially a classical Sicilian where white is playing bishop to e3 rather than bishop to g5 or bishop to c4. And this is considered to be a pretty good rejoinder. From here, white has two tries. There's bishop to g5, which I think is okay. Well, at least a complicated play. I mean, one line is like this. So kind of reminiscent of the knight to g4 Najdorf against the English attack. But black can also play the very complicated queen to b6. And this position is just kind of, it's just messy. It takes some time to figure out what's going on here. The point is that knight takes d4 is met by bishop d7 check, and then queen takes g4 check. And if queen takes d4, then there's bishop takes c6. So it's kind of a funny position. Anyway, instead of that, white can also play bishop to b5, allowing black to wreck white's structure, but in return, white maintains this lead in development and hopes that the f-file can prove useful for the attack. All right, instead of this, black played e5. White played knight to b3. And now we've transposed into kind of a slightly oddball Boleslavsky wall. I mean, that would occur with, let's say, the knight on c3, and then white playing bishop to e2, black playing knight f6. So knight f6, knight c3 is close to that. This is probably an okay version for black. And for example, on f4, you can equalize with either d5 or e takes f4, and then knight to d7, generally followed by something like bishop to f6, bishop e5, or putting a knight on e5. Anyway, I would say bishop to e3 is slightly premature in this kind of variation. Sometimes it might go to g5 to take the knight on f6, going for control over d5, which is a theme we've seen in a couple of the games so far. All right, well, black instead played f5, and here I think white's reaction was quite good. I think bishop to c4 is a nice move. Just sacrificing the pawn on e4, but in the process obtaining a big lead in development and very nice control over the light squares. So black took, knight c3, bishop f5, castles, knight f6, and here another interesting move was played. f3, sacrificing or making the pawn sacrifice permanent. I don't think this is the best that white can do, but I do think that white has fair compensation for the 2 pawns in this position. We'll come back to that in a moment. But I think it's much simpler to just go for the more stereotyped bishop to g5, trade off the light square defender, and then play knight to d2, followed by knight d takes e4, with very nice control over the light squares. I mean, white's got a great blockade over the black center. This is really kind of a very good Sveshnikov for white. Usually in the Sveshnikov, black has a nice lead in development. White has to spend a lot of time bringing the knight from d4 to b5 to a3 to c2 to e3, and sometimes from there to d5. Well, here, it's white who's ahead in development. I mean, white's castled, black hasn't. So I think white's got an edge here. So after f3 and all of these captures, white has, I think, pretty good compensation for the 2 pawns, but only good compensation, not the advantage. Knight to d2 might be best here, again, looking perhaps to post the knight on e4 at some point. All right, knight to d5 is certainly okay, though. Here, maybe rook a to c1. Something like this might be playable, but I think black is doing all right there. In the game, white played bishop to g5, and here black just collapsed with castles. I mean, just an outright blunder, and the game ends very quickly. Just double check. Thank you for the piece. Take this, and this also walks into more tactics. Just queen takes e4. Another mistake. And here, white simply up a pawn for nothing a piece for nothing with a fantastic position, so black resigned. The right way for black to play was bishop to g6, just bringing the bishop home and preparing maybe to put it on f7 to close the diagonal in the hopes of maybe castling at some point. From here, white has some options. You could try bishop f6 and then bishop d3, going for some kind of light squared blockade. Although it's probably, again, not really enough for full compensation. The knight on b3 is kind of out of play. I mean, all it does is it has a purely negative function, which is to stop knight to d4, and it's hard to see really how white makes progress here. Another possibility is knight e7. It's probably a little bit better. Queen e7, rook c1, rook c8, and I think white has about a pawn and a half's worth of compensation for the 2 pawns. So I don't think it's full comp, but I think it's very difficult for black to actually prove a win here. Okay, so that is it for this game, and then I think the last one, yes, this is the very last game. So it's submitted by Blobby12, who had black in this game, facing the Verisov, and he wanted to know what I think about, first of all, f3, and then his rejoinder c5. And so first, before I get to that, I want to make a couple other comments here. So one is that h6, which looks really cooperative, is recommended by Larry Kaufman in his new book, The Kaufman Repertoire for White and Black, or Black and White, whatever it is. I think, yeah, he calls it for Black and White. So it's sort of this two-headed book. If you turn it, you flip it around, you start from the back, it goes gives Black's repertoire. If you go the other way and turn it upside down, it's White's. Anyway, he recommends h6. And knight b8 has been the move that I've played when I faced the Verisov. But bishop f5 is also quite respectable. Here, I would say that White's maybe most principled try is bishop takes f6, but f3 is a sharp move. But against this, I think c5 is perfectly good. Knight b8 is more common, but there's absolutely nothing wrong with c5. I think this is a fine move, and as far as I can tell, White doesn't gain an advantage against this. All right. In the game, White played e4, and I think that White doesn't get any advantage with this. I think the best try for an advantage may be d takes c5. And here everyone plays d4, but I'm not sure this is the best move. After e4, White has done pretty well, and I'll give you some quick lines here. So first of all, if bishop to c8, then knight to b5, threatening the pawn, e5, c3, a6, check. Okay, and black is going to regain the material, but I kind of think that White's bishops are going to prove pretty effective here. And in this position, White is up a pawn. So black's got maybe a little compensation. I mean, White has to finish his kingside development, but bishop e2 and castles is not going to take that long, and there really aren't any serious targets in White's position. So I think this is not really very good for black. Line 2 after e4. So bishop to g6, going back this way. Well, here, maybe knight to a4 is all right. And on knight c6, then again, c3, trying to break up the center. And here, too, I think white's a little bit better. The main move that's been tried here is d takes c3. And you get this kind of ragged structure. Well, everything's kind of ragged here, right? I mean, both sides have bad pawns, and black isn't castling. White's got the bishop pair. But all in all, I think I would prefer to have white here. Material is even, but I think that white's bishops are more important than black's ostensibly better pawn structure. I don't even think it's really all that much better, because I think the pawn on f5, the only way that's going off the board is in an exchange. I mean, black is not going to win that guy. The c2 pawn is a little bit weak, but it's not so easy to get to it, and the b7 pawn is maybe a bit of a nuisance too. And meanwhile, black's king is stuck in the center, the board's open for bishops, so I would prefer white here as well. So I think d4, e4 is what white wants. But instead I would say play knight to c6, and this I think is just fine. So now e4 is just worthless. I mean, we can recapture with the rook, and we've got enough guard on e4 anyway. So the principal try, since d4 is going to come next, if white doesn't stop it, is to grab this pawn here. But now, after this very calm bishop to e6, I think black is doing great. Queen takes is probably as good as anything else. And next black will take on c5. If white tries to be greedy with knight to e4, then knight to b4, I think, is a suitable punishment. So something like this, and I think black is already better. And f5 is going to come sooner or later, and the c5 pawn is likely to drop. Another move is e4, but now, okay, we just take. And I believe that black's bishops are sufficient for the pawn. The king side is fine. The double pawns don't matter there. And, you can see the black bishops are very active. White is going to have a difficult time getting his king out of the center to connect the rooks. And, well, anyway, that sort of, I think, summarizes my view on this. Black has very good play for the pawn. So, d takes c5, I think, while the most challenging move, is not such a big deal. Alright, well, in the game, white played e4, and now black just took. And here, white has, I think, 3 moves that we can discuss. Very quickly, if d5, kind of like a sort of inverted Albin counter gambit, I suppose, then knight b to d7, and black is doing just fine. No problems here. If bishop to b5 check, this leads to very, very sharp play. This is perhaps a line that needs some careful investigation. So bishop to d7, d takes c5, queen a5, queen e2, defending the bishop, knight to d5, threatening to take on c3, bishop d2, takes, threatening now to take on b5, so white must check here. And here, material is even, and it's just a messy position because both sides have some difficulty finishing their development smoothly. Especially black, I think, but white has other kinds of problems. He has various structural problems. So this position strikes me as equal, but one where, if you're gonna face this again, you might want to spend some time trying it in blitz games and maybe goofing off with the computer. Okay, well, in the game, instead of either d5 or bishop to b5 check, white played bishop takes f6, and this seems to be just no big deal at all. So this is kind of reminiscent of the position we looked at earlier, but I think black is doing better here because now white doesn't have the bishop here, so the king is completely safe on c7. White's best maybe bishop to c4, although after all of this, material is even, but I think black is doing a little bit better, as I think the squares like d6 and e5 are more useful to him than e6 is to white. Okay, and the game was b takes c3, bishop a3 check, and now knight to c6. Again, material is even, but I think black is doing very well here, and we'll leave the game at this point. I mean, it's been a plenty long video anyway, but essentially the questions were about the opening, and I think black has really done very well here and stands slightly better. Alright, so that'll do it. 8 games we looked at, and took us a while to get through them, but I hope you found it worthwhile. So, this is FIDE Master Dennis Monokroussos signing off. I'll see you guys later. Bye-bye.